Hey guys! Tonight, we're stepping into the exhausting and deeply uncomfortable world of medieval work, not the lives of kings or knights, but the people who cleaned the streets before sunrise, emptied human waste from castle toilets, buried plague victims, and spent entire winters soaked in mud, smoke, blood, and freezing rain. When most people imagine medieval life, they picture giant castles, crowded feasts, and shining armor. But for ordinary workers, daily life was usually far less glamorous. Many jobs were dangerous, some were disgusting, and others were so physically exhausting that most modern people probably wouldn't survive even a single week. Imagine waking up long before dawn in a freezing wooden house, pulling on damp clothes that never fully dried, and walking through dark, muddy streets lit only by faint lanterns and moonlight. The smell of smoke, animals, sweat, and sewage lingered almost everywhere, and depending on your job, things could become much worse. Some medieval workers handled dead bodies, some cleaned public toilets by hand, some worked deep underground with almost no light at all, and some spent years serving nobles who barely noticed they existed. But before we slowly step into tonight's miserable medieval workplaces, take a moment to like the video, subscribe if you're enjoying the channel, and let me know down in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Now, lower the lights, get comfortable, and let's quietly wander into the strange and exhausting world of medieval labor. The village is still dark when the first workers wake, long before church bells echo across the fields, before merchants unpack their carts, before smoke rises from bakery chimneys. There are already figures moving silently through the cold. A woman kneels beside a bucket of cloudy water, scrubbing yesterday's stains from rough wool clothing. Nearby, someone coughs violently behind a thin wooden wall. A tired horse shifts in muddy straw. Somewhere in the darkness, a baby cries briefly, then goes quiet again. The homes of workers during medieval times were often cramped, damp, and permanently chilled during colder months. Many families slept together in a single room. Privacy barely existed. The air smelled of wet wood, smoke, and unwashed fabric that never fully dried near weak indoor fires. And yet, before sunrise fully arrives, work already begins. For laborious, exhaustion was not an occasional problem. It was a permanent condition. The human body rarely had time to recover. A farm worker might spend 12 hours lifting wet soil beneath freezing rain. A servant could climb endless staircases carrying buckets heavy enough to bruise the shoulders. A blacksmith stood near roaring heat all day only to return home to an icy room at night. There were no weekends, no vacations, no comfortable retirement waiting at the end. Most workers continued until injury, sickness, or age made labor impossible, and even then, survival was uncertain. As dawn slowly spreads across the horizon, the roads begin filling with movement. Wooden carts creak through puddles. Boots sink into thick mud. Thin dogs wander between alleyways searching for scraps. In larger towns, sewage sometimes flowed openly beside crowded streets, especially after heavy rain. The smells could become overwhelming: rotting food, animal waste, smoke from burning peat, and beneath it all, the quiet understanding that disease was always nearby. People during medieval times understood very little about infection. Illness often appeared suddenly and spread quickly through crowded homes and narrow streets. A single sickness could leave entire families weakened within days. Yet work continued anyway, because stopping work could mean starvation. Inside castles, another exhausting world existed behind stone walls. Servants woke before nobles and slept long after them. Fires needed constant attention. Floors required cleaning. water had to be carried by hand from distant wells. Meals for large households demanded endless preparation. Most nobles barely noticed the workers surrounding them. Food appeared, candles burned, beds stayed warm, and invisible labor made it possible, but invisibility did not protect servants from punishment, a drop plate. Cold food or slow response could lead to humiliation or violence, and still, the work never truly ended. Even nighttime brought little peace. Many workers repaired tools by candlelight after returning home. Others prepared food for the following morning or washed clothing in freezing water beneath moonlit skies. Sleep itself was often uncomfortable. Mattresses were stuffed with rough straw, fleas hid inside blankets, wind slipped through cracks in wooden walls, and outside. Distant church bells marked the passing hours few workers could afford to waste, but perhaps the strangest part of medieval labor was how ordinary suffering became. People adapted to things that would horrify most modern minds. Children worked young, injuries healed badly, teeth rotted, hands hardened into cracked leather from endless labor, and slowly, exhaustion became the natural rhythm of life itself. Tonight's journey through medieval work is not really about kings, battles, or famous events. It is about the quiet lives history rarely pauses to notice. The workers standing ankle-deep in frozen mud before sunrise, the servants carrying water through dark corridors, the laborious breathing smoke, dust, and sickness every single day. Most of them left behind no books, no portraits, no grand monuments, only worn tools, damaged bones, and brief mentions in records written by people far more powerful than they were. And as the firelight flickers against cold stone walls, our long walk through the exhausting world of medieval labor is only just beginning. The night never feels long enough, somewhere beyond the darkness, before the first faint trace of morning touches the hills, a bell begins to ring through the cold air, slow, heavy, lonely. Its sound drifts across fields soaked in mist and through villages still buried beneath sleep. But for thousands of workers during medieval times, this bell is not gentle. It is a warning. Morning is coming, and soon the labor will begin again. Inside a small wooden house near the edge of a farming village, a man opens his eyes to darkness so complete that the room itself almost disappears. For a moment, he lies still beneath a rough blanket stuffed with straw, listening to the familiar sound surrounding him. The crackle of dying embers, the quiet breathing of children nearby, wind pressing softly against warped wooden walls. Then comes the ache. His shoulders hurt before he even moves. His knees feel stiff from yesterday's work in frozen soil. His fingers remain swollen from carrying wet timber through rain that lasted until dusk. Yet despite the pain settling through his body, he knows he cannot stay here. Outside, the world is already stirring. A rooster cries somewhere in the distance. Another bell echoes faintly from a monastery farther uphill, and one by one, lights begin appearing through tiny windows across the village. Most homes during medieval times had little protection from cold weather. Thin walls allowed damp air to creep inside throughout the night, especially during winter months. Many workers slept fully clothed simply because removing layers beside a weak fire felt unbearable. Even rising from bed required determination. The floor beneath his feet feels freezing. He pulls on boots still damp from yesterday's mud. The leather has stiffened overnight, making each movement uncomfortable. Nearby, his wife quietly pours water into a small iron pot suspended above weak coals. Breakfast is simple. Dark bread, thin porridge, perhaps onions if supplies remain. For poorer families, mornings were less about comfort and more about survival. Food needed to last, fuel needed to last, bodies needed to last, and all three were constantly wearing down. Beyond the village, the fields wait silently beneath pale fog. Farm workers move slowly across narrow paths carrying tools over their shoulders. Their lanterns flicker weakly in the darkness like drifting stars. Nobody speaks much at this hour. There is only the sound of footsteps through wet grass, and distant animals waking inside wooden pens. The cold before sunrise during medieval times could feel merciless, without modern heating, thick insulation, or dry clothing. Many workers began their mornings already uncomfortable before labor even started. Fingers numbed quickly. Wet fabric clung to skin. Breath floated visibly through icy air, and still the day stretched ahead. Inside larger towns, mornings unfolded differently. Street cleaners moved through alleyways before merchants arrived. Bakers prepared ovens while the sky remained black above rooftops. Stable workers shoveled waste from cramped stalls as horses stamped impatiently against stone floors. Everything depended on preparation. If one worker overslept, dozens of others could suffer delays. In a castle kitchen, servants already hurry through shadows lit only by torchlight. A young boy struggles beneath the weight of a wooden bucket nearly as large as his torso. Nearby, cooks prepare fires that will burn almost continuously until nightfall. Smoke thickens beneath low ceilings. Someone cuts stale bread beside a long table while another servant rushes toward storage rooms carrying empty baskets. The castle itself remains asleep, but below stairs, exhaustion has already begun. For servants during medieval times, waking before sunrise was not unusual. It was expected. Noble households required enormous amounts of labor simply to maintain daily comfort. Fires needed tending. Water required carrying. Floors demanded cleaning before wealthy residents opened their eyes. Much of this work happened invisibly, quietly, without praise, and often without enough rest. As the first gray light finally touches the horizon, medieval Europe slowly reveals itself. Frozen fields shimmer faintly beneath dawn frost. Church towers emerge from morning fog. Thin smoke rises from chimneys into silent skies. For a brief moment, the world almost looks peaceful, but beneath that calm beauty lies constant fatigue. A fisherman near the coast pushes his small boat into dark freezing water. A widow walks miles toward market carrying eggs inside a woven basket. Miners disappear underground before sunrise fully arrives, knowing they may not see daylight again until evening. Everywhere, labor begins, and strangely, many workers accepted this life without imagining anything different. During medieval times, hardship often felt permanent, almost woven into existence itself. Most people were born into the same work as their parents. A farmer's child became another farmer. A blacksmith's son learned the furnace. A servant's daughter entered service. Choice was limited, survival came first, dreams came second, sometimes never at all. Yet despite the exhaustion, there were quiet moments workers carried with them. The warmth of bread fresh from an oven before dawn, birdsong slowly appearing across empty fields, the soft orange glow of sunrise spilling through forest trees, small moments of peace hidden carefully inside difficult lives. And perhaps that is what made medieval mornings so haunting, not just the cold, not just the labor waiting ahead, but the strange beauty that existed beside suffering. Every single day, soon, the roads will fill completely, markets will open, hammers will ring against iron, servants will race through crowded halls. And the long exhausting machinery of medieval work will once again begin turning beneath the rising sun. But for now, in these quiet moments before daylight fully arrives, Europe still holds its breath, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, even harsher jobs are waiting for us. By the time the sun finally rises above the fields and rooftops of medieval Europe, most workers already feel tired, not the ordinary tiredness of a poor night's sleep, something deeper, a heaviness carried in the bones themselves. the kind of exhaustion that never fully disappears. For many laborers during medieval times, life moved in a permanent cycle of effort and recovery that never truly balanced. The body weakened faster than it healed. Muscles burned through long days of lifting, digging, hauling, climbing, scrubbing, and carrying. While food remained simple and rest remained short and slowly. Year after year, exhaustion became part of a person's identity in a narrow farming village surrounded by wet spring fields. A young worker bends low over dark soil already soaked from recent rain. His hands move automatically, scattering seed into shallow furrows while cold wind brushes across the open land. He slept perhaps 5 hours, maybe less. The previous evening lasted late into darkness repairing damaged fencing after animals escaped during a storm. Before that came an entire day behind an iron plow dragged through stubborn earth by exhausted oxen. Now morning has barely begun. And his shoulders already ache. The medieval body was constantly under pressure. Workers consumed calories slowly through coarse bread, weak ale, onions, cabbage, and occasional scraps of meat when fortune allowed. Yet many jobs demanded enormous physical energy. Farmers walked miles daily. Blacksmiths hammered iron for hours beside roaring heat. Servants climbed endless staircases carrying water and firewood through castles built more for defense than comfort. The human body endured tremendous strain, and there was almost no escape from it. Even children worked. A girl no older than 10 kneels beside a stream washing clothing against rough stones while icy water numbs her fingers pale white. Nearby, her younger brother gathers fallen branches for fuel. Their movements already carry the quiet seriousness of adults. During medieval times, childhood itself was often brief. Families depended on every pair of hands available. The wealthy might study or train for courtly life. But ordinary children learned survival through labor almost immediately. Carrying buckets, feeding animals, grinding grain, cleaning tools, assisting craftsmen. Rest was rarely treated as important. Idleness could even appear suspicious. As afternoon approaches, heat slowly thickens above crowded streets inside a growing town. A baker wipes sweat from his forehead while dragging heavy trays near roaring ovens. Across the road, a cooper shapes wooden barrels beneath constant hammering. The sound echoes endlessly through narrow alleyways where traders, servants, laborers, and animals push through mud and smoke together. The noise itself becomes exhausting, so does the smell. Open waste trenches release foul odors beneath summer heat. Horses crowd the streets. Smoke from hearth fires lingers heavily between buildings. In larger medieval towns, breathing itself could feel difficult after long hours surrounded by dust, ash, and sewage, and still the work continued. One of the cruelest parts of exhaustion during medieval times was how normal it became. People rarely expected comfort. Pain was simply folded into daily existence. A blacksmith with damaged hearing from years beside iron hammers still worked. A farmer with swollen joints still worked. A servant coughing endlessly from smoke-filled kitchens still worked. Stopping often meant hunger, and hunger frightened people more than exhaustion. Inside monasteries, bells divide the day into strict rhythms: prayer, work, prayer again. Even religious communities followed exhausting routines. Monks copied manuscripts by weak candlelight late into the night. Others brewed ale, farmed land, or cared for travelers arriving after dark. Though monasteries sometimes offered more stability than ordinary village life, fatigue still shaped daily existence, especially during winter. Winter during medieval times carried a different kind of exhaustion altogether. Cold drained strength constantly, wet clothing rarely dried properly. Firewood became precious. Darkness lasted longer, forcing workers to rely on weak candlelight or smoky torches. Illness spread more easily through cramped homes where entire families huddled together beside tiny fires. Many people likely suffered from chronic malnutrition without understanding it. Others carried untreated infections for years. A simple tooth problem could become agonizing. An untreated injury might permanently weaken a laborer's ability to survive. Yet despite all this, medieval workers continued rising before dawn again and again. There is something strangely haunting about that persistence. Imagine a servant walking through castle corridors after midnight carrying fresh water to noble chambers. Her feet ache from standing all day. Smoke stings her eyes. Her hands remain rough from winter washing. Still, tomorrow morning she will rise before sunrise once more, not because she feels strong, but because life gives her little alternative, and perhaps that is the hidden truth beneath medieval exhaustion. It was not dramatic, not heroic, not sudden. It arrived slowly, quietly. A constant wearing away of body and spirit over decades of labor most history books barely mention. No cheering crowds witnessed these lives. No songs celebrated the worker cleaning stables in freezing rain or the woman hauling water through dark streets before dawn, yet entire kingdoms depended on them. Castles remained warm because servants stayed awake. Cities functioned because laborers endured endless discomfort. Fields produced food because exhausted farmers kept walking behind. Plough season after season, the medieval world rested upon tired shoulders, and as evening slowly descends across the land once again, candles begin glowing behind tiny windows. Fires crackle softly in crowded homes. And countless workers sink into uneasy sleep knowing only one thing for certain: in a few short hours, the bells will ring again. From a distance, medieval castles almost appear magical. Tall stone towers rise above the countryside like silent mountains. Banners drift slowly in the wind. Warm golden light glows behind narrow windows during winter evenings, and travelers approaching from muddy roads might imagine comfort waiting inside. But castles during medieval times were not peaceful places for the people who worked within them, behind the grand halls. Beneath the music, feasts, and candlelit ceremonies existed another hidden world entirely, a world of exhaustion, of endless obedience, of servants who spent their lives making noble comfort possible while rarely experiencing comfort themselves, long before sunrise touches the castle walls. Movement already begins below the great chambers, in cramped servant quarters hidden deep beneath stone corridors. Tired workers slowly rise from rough mattresses stuffed with straw and old fabric scraps. The air smells faintly of damp stone, smoke, sweat, and extinguished candle wax. A young servant girl opens her eyes to darkness broken only by weak orange embers inside a small iron brazier. Nearby, several others still sleep tightly together beneath wool blankets too thin for winter cold. But she cannot remain here. The kitchens must be prepared, water must be carried, fires must be lit before the nobles awaken. Quiet footsteps echo softly through narrow passageways as servants disappear into the sleeping castle like shadows returning to familiar places. Castles were enormous machines of labor. Almost everything required human effort. There were no pumps carrying water through walls. No automatic heating. No electric lights pushing back darkness. Every candle had to be replaced. Every floor cleaned by hand. Every heavy object physically carried through endless staircases and corridors, and much of this labor fell upon servants. Inside the kitchens, warmth arrives quickly. Massive hearth fires roar against blackened stone walls while cooks prepare bread, broth, roasted meats, and pastries for noble households that sometimes numbered in the hundreds. Smoke gathers heavily near ceiling beams. Ash drifts through the air. knives strike wooden tables in steady rhythm. The work here never truly stops. Even during the quietest hours, someone is always chopping, scrubbing, lifting, carrying, or cleaning. A boy no older than 12 struggles across the kitchen floor beneath the weight of a large bucket filled with water from the castle well. Some castles required servants to climb countless stairs daily, simply transporting water between levels. By midday, shoulders burned, hands blistered, legs trembled from exhaustion, and still more work waited. During medieval times, servants occupied a strange position within castle life. They were always nearby, yet often ignored completely. Nobles expected invisible efficiency. Meals should appear hot, rooms should remain clean, beds should stay warm, clothing should be repaired without delay, and if something failed, servants themselves often received blame. A spilled cup of wine, a missing utensil, cold food served too slowly. Even small mistakes could lead to punishment or humiliation. Some noble households were kinder than others, of course, but castles depended heavily upon strict hierarchy. Servants existed near the bottom, where comfort mattered little compared to obedience. Above the kitchens, the castle slowly awakens. Sunlight filters through narrow windows into long stone halls where tapestries sway faintly in cold drafts. Noble guests gather near fireplaces while servants move quietly around them, carrying trays, pouring drinks, adjusting chairs, and replacing candles burned low through the night. Most conversations pass over them entirely. A servant may spend years inside a castle without truly belonging to it, seen but rarely noticed, and life beyond the public halls could feel even harsher. Laundry workers scrubbed heavy fabrics in freezing water during winter months. Stable workers shoveled waste before dawn while horses kicked impatiently against wooden stalls. Chamber servants emptied waste buckets from private rooms and cleaned filth most nobles preferred never to think about. The glamorous image of castle life fades quickly once the hidden labor becomes visible, and the castle itself could be deeply uncomfortable. Stone walls trapped cold air during winter. Many corridors remained damp year-round. Smoke from torches and hearths irritated eyes and lungs. Rats moved through storage rooms and lower passageways searching for grain. At night, servants often slept only a few hours before beginning again, yet despite the hardship, many people still sought castle service. Why? Because survival outside castle walls could feel even more uncertain. A servant might at least receive food, shelter, and some protection during famine or conflict. Peasant villages suffered terribly during harsh winters, crop failures, and disease outbreaks. Castles sometimes offered stability ordinary laborers could not easily find elsewhere, but stability came with a cost. Freedom disappeared, schedules belonged to someone else. Even sleep depended upon noble demands. Late at night, long after feasts have ended and musicians finally lower their instruments, servants continue working beneath fading torchlight. One young worker carefully scrubs spilled wine from stone floors while distant laughter echoes from chambers above. Another carries fresh firewood through silent corridors where only flickering shadows move beside him. Outside, rain taps softly against castle walls. The countryside sleeps beneath darkness, but inside the castle, labor continues quietly into the night, and perhaps that is what makes the life of medieval servants feel so haunting. They existed at the very center of wealth and power, yet remained trapped far from comfort themselves. They witnessed luxurious feasts while eating scraps. They warmed noble chambers while sleeping in cold corners below stairs. They carried elegance upon exhausted shoulders, and tomorrow morning, before sunrise reaches the towers once again, they will wake in darkness and begin all over again. There are certain medieval jobs most people never think about, not because they were unimportant, but because they were too unpleasant to remember. Far below the grand halls of castles and beneath the crowded streets of medieval towns, There existed a world almost nobody wanted to see, a world of rot, of darkness, of unbearable smells rising slowly through stone passageways after midnight, and somewhere inside that hidden filth worked the gong farmers. Even the name sounds strange now, but during medieval times, gong farmers performed one of the most necessary and horrifying jobs in Europe, because someone eventually had to clean the toilets. Night hangs heavily over the castle. Rain taps softly against narrow windows while most noble residents sleep beneath thick blankets above. Torches flicker weakly along lower corridors where shadows gather beside damp stone walls, and deep below the castle itself, a lone figure descends carefully into darkness carrying a lantern. The smell reaches him before the pit does, heavy, rotting, almost solid in the air. He pauses briefly at the bottom of the stairs, wrapping cloth tighter around his mouth before continuing forward. This is where the waste collects. During medieval times, many castles used guardrobes, small toilet chambers built into thick stone walls. Human waste often dropped through vertical shafts into pits below the castle or into nearby moats and rivers. Over time, those pits filled steadily with layers of sewage, ash, food scraps, and foul-smelling runoff. Eventually, someone needed to remove it. That someone was usually a gong farmer. The work happened mostly at night. Not for mystery or secrecy, but because the smell became overwhelming once daylight warmed the air. Gong farmers climbed into cesspits carrying shovels, buckets, ropes, and lanterns, digging through human waste by hand before transporting it outside city walls or into dumping grounds. It was filthy beyond imagination, and dangerous too. Inside one crowded medieval town, narrow alleyways twist between leaning wooden buildings where sewage water trickles slowly along open drains beside the road. The smell of waste never fully disappears here. Chamber pots empty from upstairs windows. Rainwater mixes with animal filth beneath wagon wheels. Cleanliness during medieval times looked very different from modern life. Bathing was inconsistent, waste systems remained primitive, and rapidly growing towns often struggled to manage enormous amounts of human sewage. At night, gong farmers moved quietly through these streets with heavy carts rattling over uneven stones. Most people avoided looking at them directly. Children whispered stories about them. Some believed the workers carried disease simply because they spent their lives surrounded by filth. In truth, the danger was very real. The air inside cesspits could become poisonous. Some workers reportedly collapsed from toxic fumes while cleaning deep waste chambers. Others drowned after slipping into pits too thick to escape easily. Disease spread constantly among laborers exposed to contaminated water and sewage every day. Yet despite the horror of the work, gong farmers were essential. Without them, medieval towns and castles would quickly become even more unbearable than they already were. Imagine descending into a stone chamber beneath a castle after midnight. The lantern flame shakes softly in damp air, the walls sweat with moisture. Beneath your boots lies years of accumulated waste slowly rotting underground. Above you, nobles sleep peacefully after enormous feasts, and below them, you spend the night shoveling human filth into buckets. There is something deeply unsettling about that contrast. The medieval world depended constantly upon invisible labor hidden beneath ordinary life. Nowhere was that more obvious than here. Some gong farmers actually earned better wages than common laborers because few people were willing to do the work. But higher pay came with social isolation. Many workers were viewed with disgust regardless of necessity. The smell alone often clung permanently to clothing and skin no matter how much washing followed. And washing itself was difficult. Soap remained expensive. Clean water was not always nearby. The odors of medieval towns already lingered everywhere. But cesspit workers carried something stronger. something people remembered. As the night deepens, one worker empties another heavy bucket into a wooden cart waiting outside the castle walls. Rain continues falling steadily across silent streets. Nearby horses shift nervously in their stalls while distant church bells echo faintly through darkness. The entire world feels asleep except for him, this strange lonely labor hidden beneath civilization itself. And perhaps the most haunting part is how ordinary it all became. People during medieval times accepted terrible smells as part of daily existence. Rotting garbage, animal waste, smoke, and sewage blended constantly into the atmosphere of crowded settlements. Life expectancy remained short partly because sanitation remained so poor. But most people had little choice except adaptation. You learn to breathe through it, to ignore it, to survive beside it, and somewhere before dawn finally arrives. The gong farmer finishes his work, his lantern burns low, mud and sewage stain his boots, exhaustion settles deep into his body as he slowly climbs back toward the surface world where morning waits beyond the rain. Soon the castle will awaken again, servants will prepare breakfast, nobles will gather in warm halls, merchants will open crowded markets, and almost nobody will think about the man who spent the entire night buried beneath the castle, cleaning away the filth everyone else preferred not to see. But as we continue deeper into the exhausting world of medieval labor, the streets ahead only grow darker, because soon we will meet the workers forced to survive among rats, sickness, and the constant shadow of disease itself. Morning arrives slowly over the marketplace, fog drifts between wooden stalls while merchants prepare for another long day beneath grey medieval skies. Bakers arrange dark loaves of bread beside smoking ovens. Farmers unload muddy vegetables from creaking carts. Somewhere nearby, a church bell echoes softly through the cold air, and then the animals arrive. A frightened cow is pulled through the crowded street by thick rope, pigs squeal sharply against wooden pens, chickens flap wildly inside woven cages. The sounds blend together into something uneasy, something tense beneath the ordinary rhythm of market life, because in medieval towns, butchers worked very close to death. Closer than most people wanted to think about. During medieval times, meat was valuable. Fresh meat even more so. Large towns depended on skilled butchers to slaughter animals quickly, prepare cuts for sale, preserve food before spoilage, and manage enormous amounts of blood and waste every single day. But behind the market stalls and busy trade, the work itself could feel brutal, terrifying even. At the edge of town, near a shallow river darkened by runoff, stands the butcher's yard. The smell reaches travelers long before the building appears. Blood, wet fur, smoke, rotting scraps left for disposal. Workers move carefully through mud-stained deep brown beneath cloudy daylight. Knives hang from wooden beams beside hooks and heavy cutting tables worn smooth by years of labor. A butcher sharpens a blade slowly against stone while nearby animals shift nervously inside narrow holding pens. There is no silence here, only breathing, movement, waiting. The work demanded physical strength and emotional distance. Animals during medieval times were not processed in hidden factories far away from daily life. Slaughter happened openly near homes, streets, and marketplaces. Children sometimes watched. So did customers. The sounds of struggling animals became part of ordinary town life for butchers themselves. Constant exposure changed people. A young apprentice grips a rope tightly while his master prepares the next kill. His face remains pale despite months spent in the yard. He has learned how quickly accidents happen here. One wrong movement, one frightened animal, one slipping hand near a sharpened blade, and suddenly the butcher becomes the injured one. Medieval butcheries were dangerous places. Large animals kicked violently when afraid. Heavy carcasses needed lifting without modern equipment. Sharp tools remained in constant use from dawn until evening. Infections spread easily through cuts and wounds exposed to blood, dirt, and filthy street conditions. Even experienced workers carried scars, hands thickened with old injuries, arms marked by blades, broken fingers healed crooked after years of labor, and surrounding all of it remained the smell. It settled permanently into clothing and skin, smoke from preservation fires mixed with animal blood until the butcher's yard carried its own atmosphere entirely separate from the rest of town. Nearby rivers often became polluted from slaughter waste dumped directly into the water. Some medieval towns tried forcing butcher shops farther away from wealthy neighborhoods because the noise and odor became unbearable during warm weather. Still, the work remained essential. Without butchers, towns could not survive winter properly. Fresh meat spoiled quickly during medieval times unless salted, smoked, or carefully preserved. Butchers prepared food supplies not only for ordinary people but also for castles, monasteries, travelers, and armies moving across Europe. Entire communities depended upon their skill, yet few truly admired them. Like gong farmers, butchers occupied an uneasy social position. Necessary, but unsettling. Many people appreciated the food while preferring not to witness the process itself, and the process could become deeply disturbing, especially before sunrise. Imagine standing inside a cold wooden slaughter yard while dawn fog rolls silently across muddy ground. Lantern light flickers against iron hooks overhead. Animals breathe heavily nearby, sensing something wrong even if they cannot understand it fully. The butcher moves calmly, almost mechanically, because hesitation makes the work harder. The apprentice watches closely, trying not to focus on fear rising inside his chest. Outside the yard, ordinary medieval life continues. Church bells ring, children chase each other through narrow streets, merchants open market stalls, but inside the butcher's world, blood darkens the earth before most people have even finished breakfast, and perhaps that constant closeness to death slowly exhausted medieval workers in ways difficult to measure. Not just physically, emotionally too. People during medieval times lived beside death far more openly than most modern societies. Disease, injury, famine, and violence remained common parts of life. But butchers confronted mortality directly every single day through repetitive acts most others avoided thinking about. Some likely became numb, others never fully adjusted, yet work continued regardless. As evening settles over the marketplace, remaining scraps are cleared away beneath fading orange light. Dogs wander near empty stalls searching for bones while ravens gather silently along rooftops above the yard. Inside, exhausted workers clean blades beside buckets of cloudy water already stained dark from the day's labor. Tomorrow morning, the animals will arrive again, the knives will sharpen again, and beneath the ordinary life of the medieval town, the terrifying rhythm of the butcher's work will quietly continue. But darker streets still wait ahead of us, because beyond the slaughter yards and crowded markets, another kind of worker moves silently through medieval towns at night, listening for scratching sounds hidden beneath walls, watching disease spread through filthy alleyways, and hunting the creatures most people feared almost as much as death itself. By the time darkness settles over the medieval town, the streets begin to change. The noise fades first, market sellers disappear behind wooden shutters. Horses vanish into cramped stables. Lanterns glow faintly through crooked windows while smoke drifts upward into the cold night air. But something else begins moving now, quietly, hidden beneath floorboards, behind barrels, inside trenches and piles of rotting waste. Rats, during medieval times, they were everywhere, in castles, in bakeries, inside grain storage rooms, under beds, inside walls, and for the people forced to hunt them. The work became a slow descent into some of the filthiest corners of medieval life. near the edge of town, beside a row of leaning wooden buildings blackened by smoke and rain, a rat catcher walks carefully through mud carrying a lantern and several crude traps tied to his belt. His boots splash through puddles mixed with sewage runoff. The smell surrounding him feels thick and damp: rotting vegetables, animal waste, wet straw, smoke from cheap fires burning low behind shuttered homes. This is where the rats thrive. Medieval towns created perfect conditions for infestation. Food scraps littered streets. Open drains carried waste slowly between buildings. Grain stores attracted rodents constantly, especially during colder months when animals searched desperately for warmth and shelter. And where rats gathered, disease often followed close behind. People during medieval times did not fully understand how illness spread. Many blamed bad air, divine punishment, or mysterious forces beyond human control. But they recognized one thing clearly enough: places filled with rats usually meant danger. The rat catcher kneels beside a bakery wall where scratching sounds echo faintly beneath warped wooden boards. He places a small baited trap carefully near the opening before moving farther into the alley. The work requires patience and nerve. Some rat catchers used dogs or trained ferrets to flush rodents from hiding places. Others relied on clubs, traps, smoke, or simple bare-handed speed. It was exhausting work made worse by the environment surrounding it: dark cellars, rotting storage rooms, filthy drains beneath crowded streets. The deeper a town's infestation became, the worse the labor felt. Inside one grain warehouse near the river, the air smells stale and dusty beneath weak lantern light. Sacks of barley line the walls while scratching noises move constantly through the darkness beyond them. A warehouse worker whispers nervously about disappearing food supplies, about fleas, about sickness spreading through nearby homes. The rat catcher says little. He has heard these fears before, especially in recent years. As medieval towns expanded, overcrowding worsened sanitation problems almost everywhere. Narrow streets trapped waste and stagnant water. Poor families often lived packed tightly together in tiny rooms where illness spread rapidly once someone became infected, and no creature symbolized that fear more than the rat, whether fair or not. People came to associate them with plague, fever, decay, and death itself. At night, the rat catcher enters places most others avoid completely: a basement beneath an inn where spoiled food rots in broken barrels, a flooded drain tunnel beneath the marketplace, the storage cellar where candlelight reveals dozens of tiny eyes reflecting from the darkness all at once. The work can become terrifying very quickly. Rats bite when cornered. They swarm unpredictably, and in some heavily infested areas during medieval times, workers described hearing constant scratching sounds inside walls even while trying to sleep. Imagine lying awake in a cold wooden room after midnight, listening to unseen movement beneath the floorboards below your bed, tiny claws scraping through darkness, endless movement hidden just beyond sight. It becomes difficult not to feel uneasy, yet rat catchers rarely enjoyed respect for their work. Like other unpleasant labors, they occupied the uncomfortable edges of society, necessary during outbreaks and infestations, but not admired. Many people avoided them entirely, especially during periods of disease when fear spread faster than facts, and fear during medieval times could become overwhelming. A single rumor about plague arriving from another town might empty streets overnight. Families barred doors. Travelers faced suspicion. Priests prayed publicly while physicians burned herbs attempting to cleanse foul air believed responsible for sickness. Meanwhile, the rats continued moving silently beneath the town. As midnight deepens, rain begins falling across the rooftops. The rat catcher pauses beneath a narrow archway beside the marketplace. His lantern flickers weakly against wet stone while distant church bells echo through mist. Nearby, A dead rat lies motionless beside an open drain, small, insignificant, and yet somehow deeply unsettling, because the medieval world constantly balanced beside invisible dangers people barely understood. Disease traveled quietly, through water, through fleas, through crowded homes and filthy streets. Workers like rat catchers stood near those dangers every day, breathing foul air and touching contaminated spaces long before medicine understood the risks surrounding them. Still, the work continued. Tomorrow morning, merchants will reopen their shops, children will run through muddy alleyways, bread ovens will glow warmly before sunrise, and somewhere beneath the ordinary life of the town, scratching sounds will return once again from behind the walls, but beyond these disease-filled streets, another kind of danger waits for us next, not hidden underground, not creeping silently through darkness, but roaring beside fire hot enough to melt iron itself, because soon we enter the brutal world of the medieval blacksmith. Long before a blacksmith appears, you hear the forge. A deep metallic rhythm echoes through the medieval town from sunrise until long after dark, hammer striking iron, again and again. Sharp sparks burst briefly into smoky air while the furnace roars like some living creature hidden behind stone walls. For people during medieval times, the blacksmith's forge stood at the center of everyday life. Farmers needed plows repaired, horses required shoes, locks, hinges, nails, knives, armor, tools, chains, cooking hooks, wagon parts. Nearly everything depended on iron shaped by hand beside intense heat, and yet despite the importance of their craft, blacksmiths worked inside one of the most exhausting and dangerous environments in the medieval world. Near the center of town, beside a muddy crossroads crowded with carts and livestock, stands the forge. Even in winter, heat spills outward through the open doorway in shimmering waves. Smoke curls upward into gray skies while nearby villagers pass carrying buckets, tools, and broken equipment waiting for repair. Inside, the air feels heavy, hot, difficult to breathe. A blacksmith grips glowing iron with long tongs while another worker pumps massive bellows beside the furnace, feeding oxygen into roaring flames bright enough to hurt the eyes. Sweat darkens their clothing despite cold weather outside. The work never truly slows. Blacksmithing during medieval times demanded enormous physical endurance. Iron could not simply be shaped once and finished. Metal required constant reheating, hammering, folding, adjusting, and cooling. Every strike needed accuracy. Every mistake wasted valuable material and precious time. Hours passed beneath unbearable heat, and one small accident could change a worker's life forever. The forge itself was filled with danger. Sparks burned exposed skin, molten metal splattered unpredictably, heavy hammers crushed fingers, smoke damaged lungs over years of breathing ash and furnace fumes. Many blacksmiths likely suffered hearing damage as well from endless hammering echoing through enclosed workshops day after day. Yet despite the risks, skilled smiths remained highly respected in many communities, because few people could master the work. A young apprentice stands near the furnace watching carefully as his master shapes red-hot iron across an anvil scarred by decades of labor. Every movement carries purpose. The blacksmith barely speaks while working. Concentration matters too much here. One moment of distraction near the furnace could become disastrous. The apprentice already bears small burns across his forearms from earlier mistakes. Tiny scars formed slowly over months spent beside the forge. During medieval times, apprenticeships often began young. Children learned trades through observation, repetition, and endurance rather than formal schooling. A blacksmith's apprentice might spend years pumping bellows, carrying coal, cleaning tools, and preparing metal before earning permission to shape iron independently. The labor hardened people quickly. Inside the forge, daylight barely matters. Smoke darkens ceiling beams above flickering orange firelight. Ash settles across wooden tables crowded with tools. The rhythmic pounding of iron fills the workshop continuously like an enormous heartbeat echoing through town. Outside, villagers pause briefly while passing the forge. Some admire the blacksmith's strength, others fear the heat and noise. There is something almost mysterious about the transformation happening inside. Cold black metal enters the furnace rigid and lifeless. Moments later, it glows bright orange beneath sparks and hammer strikes before emerging reshaped entirely. To medieval eyes, it must have seemed nearly magical, but the reality behind that transformation felt exhausting, especially during summer. Imagine standing beside roaring fire for 12 hours while thick smoke clings to your lungs and sweat pours constantly down your face. Your hands ache from gripping heavy hammers. Tiny burns sting across your arms. The workshop air tastes of ash and metal. Then imagine waking before dawn the next morning to do it all again, and blacksmiths rarely worked only for comfort or decoration. Their labor supported survival itself. Broken plows threatened harvests, damaged horseshoes slowed travel, weak weapons endangered soldiers and guards. Entire communities depended upon functioning tools created inside these smoky workshops. As evening approaches, the forge grows darker except for the furnace glow pulsing softly against stone walls. Outside, rain begins falling across muddy streets while townspeople hurry home carrying cloaks tight against the cold. Inside the workshop, the hammering continues, one final repair before nightfall. One final horseshoe, one final blade. The blacksmith's face glistens beneath orange light while smoke drifts upward through heavy air. Exhaustion settles deep into his shoulders, but stopping too early means unfinished orders tomorrow, and tomorrow already promises another endless line of customers waiting beside the forge door before sunrise. Perhaps that is what made medieval blacksmithing so relentless. The fire never truly rested, even after the furnace cooled. Repairs still waited, tools still broke, iron still demanded shaping. The work followed blacksmiths through every season of life until age, injury, or sickness finally weakened their ability to lift the hammer itself. And when that day came, another apprentice usually stepped forward to continue the rhythm, hammer against iron, fire against darkness. The endless sound of labor echoing through medieval towns long after sunset faded from the sky. But ahead of us, the road grows even more unsettling, because beyond the roaring heat of the forge, another group of workers waits among sickness and fear. Workers who entered homes most people desperately avoided, workers forced to clean the rooms of plague victims themselves. At first, the town only whispers about it. A traveler arrives coughing badly at the inn near the gate. A family farther down the street suddenly closes their shutters and stops appearing at market. Then church bells begin ringing more often than usual, slowly, heavily, and before long, people stop saying the word out loud altogether. Plague. During medieval times, few things inspired greater fear, not war, not famine, not even winter itself, because plague moved invisibly through crowded towns and villages, leaving confusion, sickness, and silence behind it. Entire homes became places others avoided. Streets emptied. Fires burned day and night in desperate attempts to cleanse the air. And somewhere inside that fear, workers still had to enter infected rooms. Someone had to clean them. The morning air feels strangely still as a lone worker walks through the town carrying a bucket, cloth wrappings, vinegar, and bundles of herbs tied beneath a cloak. People avoid standing too close. A woman pulling water from a public well lowers her eyes as he passes. Two merchants whisper quietly beside shuttered stalls. The worker continues without speaking. He has already seen what waits behind the next door. During outbreaks in medieval times, certain laborers were tasked with handling infected spaces, contaminated belongings, bedding, clothing, and sometimes even bodies themselves. Most lacked any true understanding of germs or infection, yet many believed strong smells carried disease through the air. So workers burned herbs, used vinegar, covered their faces with cloth, anything that felt protective against something invisible and terrifying. At the far end of the street stands a narrow wooden home marked quietly by fear itself. The shutters remain closed despite daylight. No smoke rises from the chimney inside. The air feels thick and stale. A weak candle flickers near the bed where blankets lie tangled beside untouched bowls of food. The room smells of sickness, sweat, smoke, and something heavier lingering beneath it all. The cleaning worker pauses briefly before opening the window. Cold gray light spills slowly across the floorboards. This was dangerous work in every possible way. Workers entered enclosed spaces where illness had already spread through entire families. Clothing, bedding, furniture, and even walls became objects of suspicion. Some towns ordered infected belongings burned entirely in public pits outside city walls. Others attempted cleaning and reuse because resources remained too valuable to waste, either way. Someone handled those contaminated objects directly, and often without protection. A medieval cleaning worker lifts soaked blankets carefully into a wooden tub while trying not to breathe too deeply. Nearby, another laborer scrubs floorboards with harsh vinegar mixtures believed capable of purifying infected rooms. Outside the house, the street remains unusually quiet. Fear changes the behavior of entire towns. People avoid gatherings, doors stay closed, conversations shorten. Even churches feel different during outbreaks, their stone halls filled with uneasy prayers echoing beneath candle smoke. And yet, despite all the fear surrounding plague, ordinary labor continued. Bread still needed baking, animals still required feeding, water still had to be carried through narrow streets every single morning. The medieval world could not simply stop functioning. Perhaps that is what made plague work so psychologically exhausting. These workers existed close to death constantly while the rest of society tried desperately not to think about it. Imagine entering room after room where illness lingers silently in the air, a child's toy abandoned beside cold ashes, half-finished meals left untouched, blankets still warm from feverish bodies, and everywhere the strange quietness that sickness leaves behind. No loud battle, no dramatic violence, only absence. During medieval times, plague outbreaks often overwhelmed communities emotionally as much as physically. Families lost multiple relatives within days. Physicians argued over causes they barely understood. Religious processions filled streets with desperate prayer while rumors spread faster than reliable information. Fear became part of the atmosphere itself, and workers cleaning infected homes absorbed that fear daily. Some towns paid them reasonably well because few others would accept the risk. But payment offered little comfort when illness could appear suddenly without warning: a cough, a fever, swollen pain beneath the skin. People watched each other nervously during outbreaks, searching constantly for signs of sickness. As evening approaches, cold rain begins falling across the town. The cleaning workers finish carrying another load of contaminated bedding toward a distant burning pit outside the walls. Smoke rises slowly into darkening skies while church bells ring once again somewhere beyond the mist. The entire town feels exhausted, not simply tired from labor, but emotionally drained from living beside invisible danger day after day. Inside homes throughout medieval Europe, families sit quietly beside weak fires listening to distant carts move through wet streets after dark. Some pray softly, others wait nervously for symptoms not yet appearing, and somewhere nearby, another worker knocks gently upon another infected door before stepping inside, because the rooms still need cleaning. The bedding still needs carrying, the floors still need scrubbing, even while fear spreads through every corner of the town. And ahead of us, the work grows heavier still. because soon we follow the laborious force to dig graves during the worst moments of medieval disease itself. The bells do not stop anymore, morning, afternoon, night, again and again. Their slow echoes drift across the medieval town beneath grey skies heavy with rain and smoke. At first, people counted the ringing carefully, one bell for a neighbor, another for a merchant, another for a child from the far end of town. But eventually, there are too many, and somewhere beyond the church walls, in wet earth darkened by constant burial, the grave diggers continue working long after everyone else has gone inside. During times of disease in medieval Europe, few jobs became more exhausting or more emotionally haunting than digging graves, because death arrived faster than the ground could keep up. At the edge of town, near a narrow chapel surrounded by crooked trees, several workers move slowly through cold morning fog carrying shovels across muddy soil already disturbed by countless recent burials. Their boots sink deeply with each step, rainwater gathers inside unfinished graves, the air smells of wet earth, smoke, and decaying flowers left beside older markers leaning crookedly in the mud. No one speaks much, there is too much work waiting. During severe outbreaks of plague and disease, medieval grave diggers faced overwhelming labor conditions. Cemeteries filled rapidly. Churches struggled to organize burials. Entire families sometimes died within days, leaving few healthy relatives capable of helping. And so the grave diggers remained, day after day, digging through rain, through exhaustion, through fear. One worker pauses briefly, pressing aching hands against the wooden handle of his shovel while distant bells echo once more across the fields. His clothes are soaked from cold drizzle. Mud stains nearly everything below his knees. He has barely slept. The previous evening lasted deep into darkness as another cart arrived carrying bodies wrapped hurriedly in cloth. Now dawn has returned, and more graves still need preparing. The labor itself was brutal. Digging by hand through wet medieval soil demanded enormous strength even under normal conditions. During winter months, frozen ground became almost impossible to break apart quickly. In crowded towns, cemetery space ran low, forcing workers to reopen older burial grounds or dig larger communal graves during major outbreaks. The emotional weight of the work may have been even heavier. Imagine spending entire days surrounded by mourning families, church prayers, and the constant awareness of disease spreading invisibly through the community around you. Every cough becomes unsettling, every fever inspires fear, and still the shovel must keep moving. Nearby, a priest murmurs quiet prayers beside another burial while cold wind stirs candle flames weakly against the rain. The grieving family stands several steps away, avoiding close contact even with each other now. Disease changes human behavior quickly. People become cautious, quiet, suspicious of ordinary closeness, yet grave diggers often had no ability to keep distance from death itself. During medieval times, workers handling bodies usually lacked protective equipment beyond simple cloth wrappings, gloves, or herbs believed capable of reducing sickness. Most understood the danger only vaguely, but enough to know this work placed them frighteningly close to infection. Still, necessity outweighed fear, because bodies could not remain inside homes indefinitely, and communities needed burial rituals even during catastrophe. As afternoon fades slowly toward evening, another cart rattles toward the cemetery through muddy roads lined with silent houses. The horse pulling it moves slowly beneath cold rain while the grave diggers prepare once again. More labor, more earth, more names quietly disappearing from the town. And perhaps the most haunting part was how quickly ordinary life adjusted to this rhythm. Markets still opened, bread still baked, children still played quietly in alleyways between funerals. The medieval world carried on beside enormous suffering because survival demanded it. But for grave diggers, There was little escape from the emotional reality surrounding them. They witnessed grief constantly, not dramatic battlefield heroics, not glorious stories sung by poets, just ordinary people disappearing quietly one after another beneath wet soil. A mother, a baker, a stable boy, a servant from the castle kitchens. The grave digger knows none of them personally, perhaps, yet helps bury them all the same. Night falls slowly across the cemetery. Lanterns glow beside open graves while mist gathers between crooked stone markers. The workers continue carefully beneath fading light because tomorrow morning more bodies may arrive before sunrise again. One grave digger wipes rainwater from his face before leaning heavily against his shovel. Exhaustion settles into his bones deeper than sleep can fully repair. Still, he remains here, because if he stops working, the town itself begins falling behind death. There is something profoundly lonely about that responsibility, to stand at the edge of society where fear, mourning, and labor meet together beneath cold skies, to perform necessary work most others avoid imagining, and to understand, perhaps more clearly than anyone else, how fragile medieval life truly was. As the final burial of the evening disappears beneath fresh earth, distant church bells ring once more through darkness. Slow, heavy, endless, the grave diggers gather their tools silently before beginning the long muddy walk back toward town beneath flickering lantern light. But ahead of us, another form of endless labor waits, because beyond the plague pits and cemetery walls, millions of ordinary workers still struggle simply to survive each exhausting season, and none worked longer or harder than the medieval farmer. When people imagine medieval work, they often picture castles first, stone towers, armored knights, great halls glowing with candlelight, but beyond those walls stretched another world entirely, a world far larger, fields spreading endlessly beneath open skies, villages built from rough timber and mud, and millions of ordinary people whose lives revolved around one exhausting reality above all else: farming. During medieval times, the farmer's life was not simply difficult. It was relentless, because the land demanded labor every season, every month, almost every waking hour of the day. Before sunrise, cold mist hangs low across the countryside while a farmer steps quietly from his small wooden house carrying a worn iron hoe across his shoulder. The air smells of wet grass and smoke drifting from distant cottages. Somewhere nearby, a rooster cries into the darkness while cattle shift slowly inside muddy pens. The world feels calm for a moment, still half asleep, but the farmer already knows how much labor waits ahead. The medieval countryside depended almost entirely on human strength. No engines plowed the earth, no machines harvested grain. Every field required hands, backs, shoulders, and endless physical effort. Oxen helped pull heavy plows when families could afford them, but even then, farming remained painfully slow and exhausting work, especially during planting season. The soil beneath his boots feels thick from recent rain as the farmer guides a wooden plow carefully across uneven ground. Mud clings heavily to his legs. Cold wind cuts across the open field while crows circle silently overhead searching for fresh seed, hour after hour. The work barely changes. Push, lift, turn the earth, walk forward, repeat. During medieval times, most farmers worked from dawn until dusk whenever weather allowed. Missing valuable planting or harvesting days could threaten survival later in the year. Entire families participated because the workload exceeded what one person alone could manage. Children scattered seed, women carried water and prepared food, older relatives repaired tools or watched animals. Everyone contributed somehow, because hunger waited constantly in the background. A poor harvest meant more than inconvenience. It could mean starvation by winter, as sunlight slowly brightens across the fields. The countryside fills with movement. Farmers bend low among growing crops while distant figures cut hay using long curved scythes. The sound of metal brushing through tall grass drifts softly through the morning air, beautiful from far away perhaps, but exhausting up close. The physical strain of medieval farming damaged the body slowly over time: bent backs, swollen knees, hands hardened into cracked rough skin after years gripping wooden tools through rain, frost, and summer heat. Many laborers likely suffered chronic pain without any meaningful treatment available beyond herbs, prayer, and endurance, and nature itself remained unpredictable. One violent storm could flatten crops overnight, drought dried entire fields into useless dust. Cold summers weakened harvests, floods drowned villages beside rivers. Farmers during medieval times lived under constant pressure from forces they could not control, yet despite this uncertainty, the work never paused for long. At midday, the farmer finally rests briefly beneath the shadow of a tree overlooking endless rows of grain moving softly beneath the wind. His meal is simple: dark bread, cheese, weak ale carried from home in a clay jug. Nearby, his children continue gathering stones from the field while insects hum through warm summer air. The moment feels peaceful, almost timeless, but even rest carries tension here. Clouds gathering on the horizon might signal trouble. An injured animal could ruin weeks of labor. A poor harvest might push the family dangerously close to famine before winter arrives. The medieval farmer learned early that comfort rarely lasted. As afternoon deepens, heat rises heavily from the earth itself. Sweat darkens rough linen clothing while oxen strain against harnesses beneath biting flies. The farmer's shoulders burn from repetitive movement. Dust clings to skin and settles inside the lungs after hours spent beneath dry summer wind, and still more fields wait beyond this one. Perhaps that is what made farming during medieval times feel so endless. The land always demanded something more. After planting came weeding, after weeding came repairs, after harvest came preparation for winter, then spring returned. And the entire cycle began again, year after year, generation after generation. Many farmers never traveled farther than nearby villages their entire lives. Their world revolved around weather patterns, crop survival, church calendars, and seasonal labor repeated with almost ritual consistency across centuries. Yet despite the hardship, there were moments of quiet beauty too: golden sunrise spreading over mist-covered fields, fresh rain cooling dry earth after weeks of heat, birdsong drifting across open countryside before dawn. The strange peaceful silence of snowfall settling over empty farmland during winter evenings. Farmers noticed these things because they lived so close to nature itself, but beauty did not lessen exhaustion. As the sun finally begins sinking toward the horizon, the farmer walks slowly home beside muddy paths glowing orange beneath evening light. His muscles ache deeply now. Dirt covers nearly every part of him. Behind him, the fields stretch endlessly into fading dusk. Tomorrow morning, before sunrise reaches the countryside again, he will return to them, because medieval farming was never truly finished, and beyond these fields, another dangerous workplace waits hidden inside smoke-filled stone houses where fire, boiling water, and sharp blades turn daily cooking into something surprisingly deadly. The medieval kitchen awaits us next. By evening, the medieval town begins glowing softly from within. Warm orange light flickers behind tiny windows. Smoke rises from cottages, taverns, workshops, and castle kitchens into the darkening sky. Families gather beside fires after long days of labor while rain taps gently against rooftops and cold wind moves through narrow streets from outside. The scene almost feels comforting, but inside many medieval homes, the air itself could become difficult to survive, because warmth during medieval times came with smoke, endless smoke, and someone eventually had to clean the places where that smoke gathered. Inside a crowded townhouse near the marketplace, a chimney cleaner kneels beside a blackened hearth while soot drifts silently through weak candlelight. The walls above the fireplace have darkened over years of smoke exposure. Thick ash coats the stone floor beneath the opening. The smell fills the entire room. Burned wood, charcoal, grease, damp ash lingering permanently in old stone and timber. The cleaner wraps cloth around his mouth before beginning. During medieval times, fireplaces served as the center of daily life. They provided heat, light, cooking fires, and sometimes the only source of warmth during brutal winters. But ventilation remained poor in many homes, especially among poorer families crowded into small wooden structures. Smoke accumulated constantly, ceilings blackened, lungs suffered, and chimneys clogged dangerously with soot capable of causing devastating fires. So chimney cleaners climbed, inside narrow stone shafts barely wide enough for the human body. Workers scraped away thick layers of soot using primitive brushes, scrapers, and bare hands. The work demanded flexibility, endurance, and an ability to tolerate darkness so complete it sometimes felt suffocating. A young worker disappears slowly into the chimney opening while weak firelight flickers beneath him. Soot rains softly downward with every movement. His breathing echoes faintly through the narrow shaft above. The chimney walls feel tight around his shoulders, hot in some places, freezing in others, and every breath tastes like ash. Children were often used for this work because smaller bodies fit more easily inside narrow chimneys and smoke channels. During later centuries, this practice became infamous, but even in medieval times, small workers frequently performed dangerous cleaning labor inside cramped spaces adults struggled to enter. It was exhausting and deeply unhealthy. Imagine spending entire days inside soot-filled passages where every movement coats your skin black and fills your lungs with fine ash. Your eyes burn constantly. Your hands scrape against rough stone. Sometimes you become stuck temporarily inside twisting shafts while trying not to panic in the darkness, all for the purpose of keeping fires burning safely. Outside the home, winter rain falls steadily across the medieval streets while smoke drifts low between crowded buildings. Nearly every house produces it. Wealthy homes burn larger fires with better ventilation. Poorer families huddle beside smoky hearths where the room itself fills with haze thick enough to sting the eyes. People during medieval times simply accepted this discomfort as ordinary life. Chronic coughing became common, walls remained stained dark, clothing absorbed smoke permanently, and chimney cleaners spent their lives inside the very source of it all. At the castle kitchens, conditions become even worse. Massive cooking fires roar beneath enormous iron pots while servants hurry through clouds of smoke trapped against high stone ceilings. Grease coats surfaces near the hearth. Ash drifts constantly through hot air illuminated by torchlight. Some kitchen chimneys grow so clogged that smoke pours back into working areas, making breathing difficult for everyone inside. And so the cleaners arrive once more. A thin worker carrying scraping tools climbs carefully onto narrow beams above the kitchen hearth while cooks continue preparing meals below. The heat surrounding him feels overwhelming. Sweat mixes instantly with soot across his face and arms. One slip could send him crashing downward onto stone floors or open flames beneath. But stopping work means risking chimney fires capable of destroying entire buildings. The danger never fully disappears. As night deepens, the chimney cleaner finally emerges from another narrow shaft covered entirely in black soot from head to toe. Only his tired eyes remain visible beneath layers of ash. Outside, cold air feels strangely fresh against his skin despite the town's usual smells of mud, smoke, and sewage. For a brief moment, he simply breathes. Perhaps that small relief mattered more than people realized, because workers during medieval times rarely experienced truly clean air. Smoke followed them almost everywhere, in homes, in workshops, in kitchens, in taverns crowded with travelers escaping winter cold beside roaring fires. Even sleep offered little escape from it, and perhaps that constant haze shaped medieval life in subtle ways history rarely describes. The dim candlelit rooms, the soot-darkened ceilings, the endless coughing hidden beneath ordinary conversation, a civilization warmed by fire, yet slowly choked by it too. As midnight approaches, the chimney cleaner walks quietly through rain-soaked streets carrying heavy brushes across his shoulder. Lantern light reflects softly in puddles while distant fireplaces continue releasing smoke into the dark sky above the sleeping town. Tomorrow morning, more chimneys will wait, more soot, more narrow passages filled with ash and darkness, but beyond these smoke-filled homes, another dangerous workplace still waits for us, a place where sharp blades, boiling broth, roaring fires, and crowded servants turned ordinary cooking into one of the most hazardous jobs inside medieval castles. The barber shop smells strangely comforting at first, warm water, soap, burning herbs drifting softly through the air. Outside, rain falls gently across the medieval town while customers gather beneath wooden awnings waiting for haircuts, beard trimming, or conversation beside the warmth of the shop. It feels ordinary, almost peaceful, until someone places a blood-stained cloth into a bucket near the wall, because during medieval times, the barber was often far more than a barber. In many towns across Europe, barbers performed medical procedures ordinary physicians either refused to handle or were too expensive for common people to afford. They cut hair, but they also pulled teeth, drained infections, stitched wounds, treated broken bones, and performed small surgeries using tools laid out beside razors and scissors. And for the workers inside these crowded little shops, daily life balanced constantly between grooming and pain. A bell above the doorway rattles softly as another customer enters from the rain, clutching one side of his jaw. The barber looks up briefly from sharpening a straight razor near candlelight. He already understands the problem. Tooth pain during medieval times could become unbearable. Poor diets, weak dental hygiene, infections, and lack of proper treatment caused constant suffering for many people. A damaged tooth might swell for weeks before someone finally sought help. And often, that help came from the barber. Inside the shop, the patient lowers himself nervously into a heavy wooden chair beside the hearth while another customer quietly watches from the corner. Metal instruments rest nearby on cloth stained faintly from previous procedures. The barber washes his hands quickly in cloudy water before reaching for iron forceps. No anesthesia waits here, no modern medicine, only speed and endurance. The patient grips the chair tightly as rain taps against the windows outside. Then comes the pull. A sharp cry echoes briefly through the shop before fading into heavy breathing and silence. The barber drops the tooth into a small wooden bowl beside the table while preparing cloth to slow the bleeding. Soon enough, another customer arrives for a simple shave as though nothing unusual happened at all. That strange mixture of ordinary grooming and painful surgery defined the medieval barber's world. Barber surgeons occupied a complicated position in society. Trained physicians existed during medieval times, especially in larger towns and universities, but many focused more heavily on theory, diagnosis, and scholarly medicine. Physical procedures like bloodletting, wound treatment, and minor surgeries often fell instead to barbers who worked directly with their hands every day. They became practical healers, not always respected by scholars, but deeply necessary for ordinary people, and their work could become deeply unsettling. Inside one crowded barber shop near the market square, candlelight flickers against polished razors hanging beside sharpened knives and small surgical saws. A wounded traveler sits quietly while the barber cleans a deep cut along his arm using wine and herbal mixtures believed to reduce infection. The smell of blood mixes strangely with soap and smoke from the hearth. Outside, life continues normally. Merchants shout prices through muddy streets, children run between carts, church bells echo through mist, but inside the barber shop, people confront pain directly. During medieval times, even small injuries carried frightening risks: a cut from farm equipment, an infected splinter, a broken bone after falling from a horse. Without antibiotics or proper surgical knowledge, minor wounds sometimes became deadly infections within days. Barber surgeons worked constantly against problems they barely understood, using crude tools and inherited techniques passed through apprenticeship. Some procedures helped, others likely caused terrible suffering, yet people kept returning because alternatives remained limited. As evening approaches, another customer enters quietly holding a cloth against his arm. Blood darkens the fabric slowly. The barber sighs softly before preparing fresh bandages near the firelight. His day is not finished yet, and perhaps that is what made the work so exhausting. The barber could never fully predict what problem would arrive next: a haircut, a fever, a knife wound, a swollen infection needing draining before it spread farther through the body. Each knock at the door carried uncertainty, and emotionally, the work demanded distance. Imagine spending years watching people endure pain you cannot fully relieve, listening to frightened patients while using tools primitive even for the standards of medieval times. Knowing some wounds may heal, while others almost certainly will not. Still, the barber continues working, because medieval towns depended upon people willing to perform unpleasant tasks others avoided. By nightfall, the shop grows quieter beneath dim candlelight and drifting smoke. Razors rest beside bowls of cloudy water stained faintly pink from the day's procedures. Outside, rain continues falling steadily across dark cobblestone streets. The barber finally sits alone beside the dying fire for a brief moment of silence. His hands ache, his eyes burn from smoke and candlelight. Tomorrow morning, more customers will arrive carrying new injuries, new infections, new fears hidden beneath cloaks and bandages, and somewhere beyond the quiet barber shop tonight, another grim medieval occupation waits for us, one even stranger than surgery beside a haircut, because soon we follow the assistants who worked beside medieval executions themselves. The crowd gathers long before sunrise. People emerge quietly from narrow streets and muddy alleyways carrying lanterns through cold morning fog. Merchants pause setting up their market stalls. Children stand close beside nervous parents. Church bells ring softly somewhere beyond the square while rainwater glistens across uneven cobblestones at the center of the gathering. Workers prepare the scaffold, not judges, not nobles. Workers, because during medieval times, executions required labor just like every other public event, and beside the executioner himself stood assistants whose strange responsibilities placed them uncomfortably close to fear, punishment, and death. The scaffold rises dark against the pale gray sky. Wooden beams creak faintly in the wind while an execution assistant checks ropes carefully beneath weak torchlight. His hands move with quiet familiarity despite the uneasy silence surrounding the square. He has done this before, many times. Execution assistants during medieval times performed practical duties few others wanted near them. They helped construct scaffolds, prepared restraints, maintained execution equipment, controlled crowds, transported prisoners, cleaned execution grounds afterward, and sometimes even handled bodies once public punishment ended. Necessary work, but deeply unsettling. The assistant pulls rough gloves tighter around his hands while another worker drags straw across damp wood to absorb blood later if needed. Nearby, town guards speak quietly beside the platform while nervous spectators continue arriving from surrounding streets. The atmosphere feels strange, not loud yet, not violent, only tense, as though the entire town is holding its breath. Public punishment played a major role in medieval justice systems. Executions, floggings, and other penalties were often performed openly because authorities believed visible punishment discouraged crime and reinforced social order. But behind every public spectacle stood workers forced to manage its uncomfortable reality, and those workers rarely escaped the emotional burden entirely. Inside a nearby holding room beneath the town hall, an execution assistant waits beside a frightened prisoner whose chains clink softly against the stone floor. A candle flickers weakly between them while cold morning air drifts through narrow windows high above. Neither speaks much. What could possibly be said? The assistant's role is practical now: check restraints, prepare the route, signal the guards when everything is ready. Yet despite routine familiarity, there is still something profoundly human about standing beside another person during their final hour. Perhaps that silence stayed with workers long after the crowds disappeared. Executioners themselves often lived isolated lives during medieval times because many people feared or distrusted them despite depending upon their services. Their assistants sometimes shared similar reputations. Children whispered stories about them. Neighbors avoided close friendships. Some workers struggled finding ordinary acceptance within their own communities. People wanted justice performed, but preferred distance from the people performing it. As daylight slowly brightens across the square, market activity pauses completely now. The crowd thickens near the scaffold beneath drifting mist and weak winter sunlight. A nervous murmur spreads through the gathered townspeople. The assistant climbs onto the wooden platform once more, checking knots carefully while trying not to look directly at the faces below, because some mornings the crowd included familiar people, neighbors, customers from local shops, children who watched silently beside their parents, and after the execution ended, the assistant still had to continue living among them. The emotional exhaustion of such work is difficult to imagine fully now, not simply witnessing death, but preparing for it mechanically, cleaning afterward, repeating the process again weeks later whenever authorities demanded it, and unlike soldiers during wartime, execution assistants worked within ordinary civilian life where routine punishment became woven into familiar streets and public squares. At midday, cold wind sweeps across the scaffold while church bells echo once more through the town. The crowd begins dispersing slowly now. Some people return quietly to work. Others whisper about what they witnessed while market sellers reopen nearby stalls as though ordinary life can simply resume. But for the assistant, the labor continues. Blood-stained straw must be removed, ropes stored, wood cleaned and repaired for future use, the square itself prepared once again for normal daily activity. There is something haunting about that transformation, a place of fear becoming a marketplace again before evening, children running across stones where silence and death stood only hours earlier, and workers quietly erasing evidence of it all. As dusk approaches, the execution assistant carries equipment back through nearly empty streets while smoke rises gently from chimneys overhead. Rain begins falling once more against rooftops and fading lantern light. The town already feels calmer now, almost ordinary again, yet exhaustion follows him heavily through the darkening streets. Not only physical exhaustion from lifting wood and hauling equipment, but something deeper, a weariness created by standing too close to human suffering for too many years, and perhaps that was true for many medieval workers, whether grave diggers, plague cleaners, or execution assistants. Certain jobs forced people into constant contact with the darkest corners of ordinary life. Still, tomorrow morning the town will awaken once again, markets will reopen, church bells will ring, and somewhere far below the surface world of castles and ceremonies, more hidden labor will continue quietly in darkness, because next, we descend underground into the freezing, dangerous world of medieval mines. The entrance to the mine barely looks important at first, just a dark opening carved into the side of a cold hillside beyond the village. mist drifts slowly across the surrounding rocks. Rainwater trickles down narrow paths cut deep by wagon wheels and years of footsteps. Somewhere nearby, pine trees sway quietly beneath gray skies while distant church bells echo faintly across the valley, but beneath that hillside, another world waits, a world without sunlight, without fresh air, without silence. During medieval times, mining became one of the most dangerous and exhausting forms of labor in Europe. Men, women, and sometimes even children descended underground searching for iron, silver, tin, coal, and salt hidden beneath the earth itself, and every journey downward carried risk. Before sunrise, a group of miners gathers outside the tunnel entrance wrapped in heavy wool cloaks dampened by cold mountain air. Lantern flames flicker weakly against wet stone while workers prepare ropes, picks, wooden supports, and baskets for the long shift ahead. Few conversations happen this early. Most miners save their energy, because once they descend underground, exhaustion arrives quickly. The tunnel narrows almost immediately after entering. Daylight fades behind them with unsettling speed until only lantern glow remains dancing softly against rough stone walls. Water drips steadily from the ceiling. Mud clings thickly to boots. The air smells of damp earth, smoke, sweat, and minerals hidden deep within the rock. Breathing feels heavier here. The farther miners traveled underground during medieval times, the worse conditions often became. Ventilation remained primitive. Oxygen grew thin inside deeper tunnels while smoke from torches and oil lamps lingered painfully in enclosed spaces. Cave-ins were constant fears, so was flooding, and sometimes miners simply disappear beneath the earth entirely. A young worker swings his iron pick rhythmically against stone while another hauls broken rock into woven baskets nearby. The sound echoes endlessly through the tunnels, strike, crack, breathing, water dripping somewhere unseen. Hour after hour, the darkness never changes. Mining demanded extraordinary physical endurance. Workers crouched for long periods inside narrow passages barely tall enough to stand. Heavy stone and ore had to be carried manually through twisting underground tunnels. Dust settled inside lungs with every breath while weak lantern lights strained tired eyes. And unlike farmers or blacksmiths, miners rarely saw the sky while working. Imagine spending entire days underground where the only light comes from flickering flames casting strange shadows across wet rock walls. You lose track of weather, of sunlight, sometimes even of time itself. Only the labor remains constant. During medieval times, mining communities often formed in remote, harsh regions where valuable resources existed beneath mountains or rocky terrain. Entire villages depended economically upon the dangerous work below ground. When mining succeeded, towns survived. When tunnels collapsed or resources failed, communities suffered terribly. At midday, deep within the mine, workers pause briefly beside a cramped chamber reinforced by old wooden beams creaking softly under enormous pressure from the earth above. The meal is small, dark bread, salted meat if available, cold water carried underground hours earlier. No one lingers long. The deeper tunnels still need clearing before nightfall. A miner wipes soot and sweat from his face while staring silently toward the darkness beyond the lantern glow. Somewhere farther below, faint hammering continues from another tunnel hidden deeper inside the mountain. The sound feels distant, almost ghost-like, and perhaps that was one of the strangest parts of medieval mining. The earth itself seemed alive sometimes. Tunnels groaned unexpectedly, dust fell from ceilings without warning, cold underground winds moved through narrow shafts carrying strange echoes from unseen places, for miners already exhausted and isolated from daylight. Fear could grow easily underground, yet the work continued because the medieval world depended upon these materials: iron for tools and weapons, silver for coins, salt for preserving food through winter. Entire kingdoms relied on resources pulled painfully from beneath the earth by workers history rarely remembers. As evening approaches above ground, the miners finally begin climbing slowly back toward the surface, carrying heavy baskets through twisting passages slick with moisture. Their muscles ache. Their lungs burn from dust and stale air. Then suddenly, the tunnel ahead grows lighter, fresh air touches their faces once again, and one by one, the miners emerge beneath open sky glowing orange with sunset. For a brief moment, the outside world feels almost unreal after so many hours underground. Cold wind moves through pine trees, birds cross fading clouds overhead, rain-smelling air fills exhausted lungs. But even this relief remains temporary. Tomorrow morning before sunrise, the mine will wait again. Dark, silent, hungry for more labor. Perhaps that endless return beneath the earth is what made medieval mining so psychologically heavy. Workers entered spaces where collapse, suffocation, or flooding could arrive without warning. Yet routine eventually forced them to treat danger as ordinary life. The human mind adapts to almost anything given enough time, even darkness underground. As night settles across the mountain village, lanterns glow softly outside small wooden homes where miners finally rest beside weak fires and aching bodies. Mud-covered boots dry slowly near doorways. Children sleep beneath wool blankets while distant wind moves through the hills above abandoned tunnels, and somewhere beneath the sleeping earth tonight. The mine remains waiting in silence, but colder days still lie ahead for us, because beyond these underground tunnels, medieval workers faced another enemy just as relentless: winter itself. Winter arrives quietly at first. A thin layer of frost appears across muddy fields before sunrise. The wind grows sharper along narrow streets. Smoke begins rising earlier from village chimneys while travelers pull heavy cloaks tighter against the cold. Then one morning, the world changes completely. Snow covers the roads, rivers stiffen beneath pale ice, and for medieval workers, survival itself suddenly becomes much harder. During medieval times, winter was not simply uncomfortable, it was dangerous, especially for laborers who could not afford enough firewood, dry clothing, or proper shelter against months of freezing weather. Yet despite the cold, work rarely stopped. Before dawn, a stable worker forces open a frozen wooden door while icy wind rushes into the yard carrying fine snow through darkness. Horses stamp heavily inside their stalls, their breath visible in the dim lantern glow. The worker's fingers already ache from cold, his boots are damp from yesterday, and the day has barely begun. Winter labor during medieval times demanded constant endurance against the environment itself. Farmers still cared for animals. Servants still carried water. Woodcutters entered frozen forests. Messengers traveled dangerous roads despite snow and storms. The medieval world could not simply pause for warmth. A woman steps carefully across an icy village path carrying 2 wooden buckets toward the public well. Snow crunches beneath her worn boots while weak morning light spreads slowly across rooftops covered in frost. The water inside the well feels painfully cold against her skin, but the household still needs cooking water, still needs washing water, still needs survival, and so she lifts the heavy buckets once more and begins the slow walk home through freezing wind. Most ordinary homes during medieval times offered poor protection against severe winter weather. Thin wooden walls allowed cold air inside constantly. Roofs leaked during snowmelt. Fires required continuous fuel many poor families struggled to afford. Even sleeping could feel exhausting. People huddled together beneath rough wool blankets beside weak fires burning low through the night. Some woke repeatedly simply to keep flames alive until morning, and if the fire died completely, the cold entered everything: hands, feet, bones, at the edge of the forest. Woodcutters move silently between snow-covered trees carrying axes across their shoulders. The forest feels strangely peaceful beneath winter fog and falling snowflakes, beautiful perhaps, but deadly too. Firewood during medieval winters meant survival. Without it, homes became freezing boxes of damp wood and smoke. Workers spent long exhausting days cutting trees, hauling logs, splitting frozen timber, and transporting fuel through icy roads barely passable after storms. Many injuries happened during winter labor, slipping on ice, frozen fingers losing grip on tools, animals collapsing during transport, illness spreading rapidly through weakened bodies exposed constantly to cold and poor nutrition. Inside castle walls, servants struggle against winter differently. Long stone corridors trap icy drafts that move endlessly through the building. Water freezes in buckets overnight. Fires must be maintained constantly in noble chambers while kitchen workers sweat beside enormous hearths before stepping back into freezing hallways moments later. The contrast itself feels exhausting. A young servant carries hot soup through dim corridors lit by torchlight while snow rattles softly against narrow windows outside. Her cheeks burn from cold air. Her hands ache from carrying heavy trays, yet somewhere above her, nobles gather beside roaring fireplaces discussing winter comfortably over warm meals and candlelight. The distance between labor and comfort during medieval times often felt enormous. As afternoon fades, snow continues falling across the countryside, roads disappear beneath white drifts, travelers move slowly through bitter wind while church bells sound muffled beneath thick clouds overhead. Still, workers continue. A fisherman breaks ice along the riverbank searching for open water. A blacksmith keeps the forge burning despite freezing temperatures outside. A farmer checks weak livestock repeatedly through the storm, fearing animals may not survive the night. Winter transformed ordinary labor into constant struggle against exhaustion itself, and perhaps the hardest part was knowing the season lasted for months, not days, not a single storm. Entire stretches of darkness and cold, where survival depended upon endurance, preparation, and luck. Many medieval workers likely feared winter long before it arrived. A poor harvest before cold season could doom families. Insufficient firewood meant sleepless, freezing nights. Illness spreading during winter often became deadly faster because weakened bodies struggled to recover. The cold exposed every weakness. As evening settles across the snow-covered village, warm orange firelight glows softly behind tiny windows while smoke drifts upward into dark winter skies. Inside small homes, exhausted workers finally remove frozen boots beside weak hearth fires. The silence of winter nights feels different somehow, quieter, heavier. The world itself seems slowed beneath snow and darkness. A tired farmer sits beside flickering firelight drying soaked gloves while icy wind whispers faintly through cracks in the walls. Tomorrow morning before sunrise, he will return outside again, because animals still need feeding, wood still needs cutting, life still demands labor even in the coldest months, and perhaps that is what made medieval winters so exhausting, not simply the freezing weather, but the realization that survival itself became a full-time job, as snow continues falling gently across the sleeping countryside tonight. Another hidden group of workers remains awake inside the warmth and filth of medieval stables, and their world smells far worse than winter air. You smell the stables before you see them, even in winter. Even beneath rain or drifting snow. The scent hangs heavily in the air around castles, inns, monasteries, and crowded medieval towns. Wet hay, mud, animal sweat, rotting straw, and beneath it all, the constant sharp smell of manure warming slowly in the cold. For medieval stable workers, this was the atmosphere of everyday life, a world most nobles barely noticed despite depending upon it constantly, because during medieval times, horses were essential to nearly everything: travel, trade, farming, messenger routes, military movement. Without healthy horses, the medieval world slowed almost to a stop. And hidden behind that enormous dependence stood exhausted, laborious working. Long before sunrise inside cold, filthy stables, the morning begins in darkness. A stable boy pushes open heavy wooden doors while lantern light flickers softly against rows of restless horses shifting in their stalls. Outside, icy wind sweeps across the castle yard, but inside the stable the air feels thick and humid from animal breath and damp straw. The worker immediately begins shoveling manure. There is always more waiting. Stable labor during medieval times was physically relentless. Workers cleaned stalls, carried water, distributed hay, brushed horses, repaired harnesses, treated injuries, removed waste, and calmed frightened animals often weighing more than 1,000 pounds. The work demanded strength, but also patience, because horses frightened easily. A nervous kick could break ribs, a sudden bite could tear skin deeply enough to become infected, and medieval workers lacked modern medicine to treat serious injuries properly. One young stable hand moves cautiously beside a restless warhorse while fastening leather straps beneath weak lantern glow. Steam rises softly from the animal's body into cold morning air. The horse stamps violently once against the wooden floor, causing the worker to step back instantly. Fear lives quietly inside every stable. Even experienced workers respected it, especially around expensive horses belonging to nobles or knights where mistakes carried severe consequences. Inside larger castles, stable complexes became enormous. Dozens of horses required feeding before dawn each morning. Water buckets froze during winter. Hay deliveries needed unloading constantly. Sick or injured animals demanded extra care through sleepless nights while messengers arrived unexpectedly requesting fresh mounts at all hours. The labor never fully stopped, and the smells followed workers everywhere. Imagine spending entire days surrounded by mud, manure, damp straw, and animal sweat while lifting heavy feed sacks across slippery stable floors. Your boots remain wet constantly. Your hands crack from cold weather and rough labor. The stable noise itself becomes exhausting. Hooves striking wood, chains rattling softly, animals breathing heavily in darkness. The medieval stable felt alive even at midnight. As sunrise slowly reaches the castle yard outside, more workers arrive carrying fresh hay beneath pale gray skies. Ravens perch silently along frozen rooftops while distant church bells echo across the countryside. Inside the stable, warmth mixes strangely with discomfort. The animals generate heat, yes, but also moisture and filth. Smoke from lanterns clings to the air while muddy water gathers beneath boots after snow melts indoors. Some workers likely developed constant coughs simply from breathing stable air year after year, yet despite the hardship, many stable hands formed deep attachments to the animals themselves. A tired worker pauses briefly beside an aging horse quietly chewing hay near the far wall. He brushes frost gently from its mane while the stable settles into rare silence around them. Moments like this mattered, because medieval labor often offered little comfort beyond small routines and familiar companionship. Animals became part of daily emotional life, especially for workers spending more time in stables than inside their own homes. At roadside inns, conditions could become even harsher. Travelers arrived after dark demanding fresh horses, warm shelter, and immediate service regardless of weather. Stable workers hauled baggage through rainstorms, tended exhausted animals through freezing nights, and cleaned filthy stalls before sunrise once again. Sleep came in short restless hours between responsibilities, and accidents remained common. A slipped horse on icy ground. A kicked lantern starting fire in dry hay. An infected wound after handling sharp horseshoes or broken tack. The medieval stable constantly balanced between routine and disaster. As evening approaches, snowfall begins again outside the castle walls while stable workers spread fresh straw beneath fading lantern light. Horses settle gradually into quieter rhythms now, though occasional restless movement still echoes softly through the long wooden building. The workers themselves look exhausted, mud stains their clothing, hay clings to rough wool sleeves, their shoulders ache from lifting and shoveling since before dawn. Still, one final round of feeding remains before sleep. Perhaps that endless repetition is what made stable work so draining. Animals could not wait, not for storms, not for sickness, not for exhaustion. Every single day required attention regardless of weather or human suffering, and tomorrow morning before sunrise, the stable doors will open once again into darkness, steam, and the smell of damp straw, but deeper inside the castle. Another dangerous workplace still waits for us, a place of boiling broth, roaring fire, slippery stone floors, and sharpened blades hidden beneath the warmth of noble feasts. The medieval kitchen awaits. The castle kitchen never truly sleeps, even when the halls above fall quiet and the nobles retire behind heavy doors. The kitchen remains alive with heat, noise, and movement. Fire crackles constantly beneath enormous iron cauldrons, knives strike wooden boards in fast, practiced rhythm, water boils without pause, and smoke lingers near the ceiling like a permanent cloud that refuses to leave. During medieval times, kitchens inside castles and large estates were among the most dangerous workplaces in daily life, not because of war, not because of punishment, but because everything inside them involved fire, blades, and pressure, handled in cramped, crowded spaces where accidents were always close. Before sunrise, kitchen workers are already awake. Long before the rest of the castle stirs, a young servant drags a heavy bucket of water across wet stone floors while embers from last night's fire are coaxed back into flame. The kitchen is cold at first, but that changes quickly, very quickly. Within hours, the entire space transforms into a roaring furnace of heat and steam. Massive hearths dominate the room, large enough to roast entire animals at once. Iron hooks hang from blackened beams holding pots filled with soups, stews, and broths meant to feed dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people. Everything is in motion, always. During medieval times, kitchen labor required constant coordination. Workers chopped vegetables, butchered meat, stirred boiling pots, carried trays, managed fires, cleaned tools, and delivered meals through long corridors to dining halls filled with nobles who rarely saw the chaos behind their food, and within that chaos, danger was everywhere. A cook leans too close to a roaring fire and feels heat scorch the side of his face instantly. Another slips slightly on a wet stone floor while carrying boiling liquid, narrowly avoiding a serious burn. There are no safety systems here, no protective gear beyond thick cloth and experience, just repetition and awareness. The kitchen floor itself becomes hazardous during busy hours. Animal fat, spilled broth, water, and ash combine into a slick surface where a single wrong step can send someone crashing into open flames or sharp tools. Knives are everywhere, long butcher blades for meat preparation, small carving tools for vegetables, heavy cleavers used on bone, all of them constantly moving through busy hands in tight spaces. A butcher inside the kitchen section of the castle works quickly as he separates meat for an upcoming feast. The sound of bone cracking echoes briefly before being absorbed into the surrounding noise of boiling water and shouting orders. There is no silence here. Even conversation must compete with fire and steam. As midday arrives, heat becomes overwhelming. The kitchen feels like a living body breathing smoke and flame. Sweat mixes with soot on every worker's face. Smoke clings to clothing and hair. I sting constantly from burning air that never fully clears, and yet work continues without pause, because meals must be ready on time. Nobles expect precision, servants expect consistency. And the entire rhythm of castle life depends on food appearing at exactly the right moment. Late meals are unacceptable, mistakes are noticed, sometimes punished. Inside a corner of the kitchen, a young apprentice stirs a thick pot with both hands, struggling to keep pace with instructions shouted from across the room. His arms ache from constant motion. His clothing is damp from heat and steam. Above him, smoke swirls near rafters blackened from years of cooking fires. Every surface tells the same story, endless labor. At times, kitchens also served as makeshift workshops for small repairs, ingredient preparation, and emergency tasks. Herbs are crushed in wooden bowls. Bread is baked in stone ovens that stay hot for hours. Meat is hung, salted, and preserved for winter storage. The scale of food preparation during medieval times was immense inside large households. Feeding soldiers, feeding servants, feeding entire court gatherings, and doing it all with tools that demanded careful handling under extreme heat. By evening, exhaustion spreads through the kitchen like smoke itself. Workers move slower now, hands tremble slightly from fatigue and burns. The fire still burns strong, but human energy begins fading long before it does. Outside, night settles over the castle grounds. Cool air drifts through open doors for a brief moment before being swallowed again by heat from the hearths. Another meal must be completed. Another round of service delivered, and only after the final dishes leave the kitchen does the space finally begin to quiet. Not fully, not completely, because embers still glow, pots still simmer faintly, and someone must remain behind to clean, reset, and prepare for tomorrow's cycle. As the last workers finally step outside into cold night air, they pause for a moment, breathing deeply as if remembering what silence feels like. Their clothes smell of smoke, their skin carries warmth from fire that never fully leaves them, and their bodies ache from standing, lifting, cutting, and carrying for hours without rest. Yet tomorrow, it all begins again, before sunrise, before the castle wakes, before anyone notices the work already happening behind closed doors, but beyond the kitchen's heat and noise. Another kind of labor waits in silence, a quieter world, where footsteps echo through empty halls and workers move only when the castle itself is asleep. Night in the medieval castle does not mean rest for everyone. Above the courtyards, torches flicker against stone towers while noble chambers glow with warm candlelight, music, and quiet conversation. Feasts may be ending, but work is not, because during medieval times, a separate group of workers moved silently through the castle long after most people had gone to sleep, servants of the night. Their world begins when others finish. A long corridor stretches through the castle's upper floors, lit only by spaced-out candles burning low in iron sconces. Shadows shift gently along carved stone walls as a small group of servants moves carefully across polished floors carrying empty trays, washed goblets, and remnants of the evening's feast. Their footsteps are quiet, careful, practiced. They have learned how to exist without being noticed. In medieval households, especially inside castles and large estates, nighttime service was essential. Nobles often ate late dinners, requested drinks, or required sudden attention even after retiring to their chambers. Fires needed tending. Lamps needed refilling. Beds needed preparation. Clothing needed organizing for the next day, and none of it waited for morning. A young servant enters a noble chamber holding a small oil lamp while the room remains partially lit by dying firelight in the hearth. Heavy curtains block the night outside, but cold air still finds its way through stone walls. The noble inside is already half asleep, barely acknowledging the presence of the servant adjusting blankets and refilling a small pitcher of water near the bedside. There is a strange silence in these moments, not peaceful silence, but controlled silence, where movement is reduced to almost nothing, where speech becomes unnecessary. where workers learned to exist as background presence in rooms belonging to others. During medieval times, nighttime servants often worked in shifts that stretched deep into the night. Some cleaned banquet halls after feasts, removing leftover food, wiping tables, carrying away heavy wooden benches, and scrubbing spilled wine from floors. Others remained inside corridors waiting for requests that might come at any moment: a noble calling for water, a guest needing guidance, a fire requiring adjustment, or simply reassurance that someone was still awake nearby. The emotional weight of this work was subtle but constant. Because while the castle slept above them, servants remained alert, listening for footsteps, bells, or distant calls echoing through empty halls. In one corridor, two servants quietly fold heavy linen cloths near a small oil lamp while speaking in hushed tones. Their hands move automatically from repetition. Their bodies are tired, but rest is not yet permitted. Somewhere above them, laughter fades from a distant chamber where nobles continue drinking long after midnight. The contrast is always present: silence below, celebration above, and yet the servants remain invisible to both worlds. During medieval times, social hierarchy shaped every movement inside large households. Nobles rarely saw the labor required to maintain their comfort. Beds were already made when they arrived. Rooms were already cleaned. Meals appeared fully prepared. Fires were already lit. Night workers ensured this illusion continued without interruption. A servant climbs a narrow spiral staircase carrying a tray of extinguished candles that will be replaced before sunrise. The stone steps are cold beneath worn shoes. Each turn of the staircase feels slightly different in darkness, as if the castle itself changes shape at night. Outside narrow windows, the moon hangs over silent courtyards. Dogs rest quietly near gates. Wind moves through banners hanging still in the dark. But inside, movement continues. At times, night work could become unexpectedly intense. If a feast ran late, servants might work until the early hours of morning, clearing entire halls filled with food scraps, broken pottery, and spilled drink. Tables required polishing. Silverware needed cleaning. Floors had to be restored to perfection before daylight revealed any sign of the previous night. Nothing could appear unfinished when morning arrived, and so exhaustion became routine, not sudden, not dramatic, just constant, a slow accumulation of fatigue that followed servants through hallways, staircases, and candlelit rooms until their bodies learned to function in a state between wakefulness and sleep. As the night deepens, most noble chambers finally grow quiet. Candles burn lower, fireplaces settle into glowing embers, and the castle begins to shift into stillness. But even then, a few servants remain awake, preparing early morning water, setting out clothing, rebuilding fires before dawn breaks, because when nobles awaken, everything must already feel ready. Effortless, natural, as if no one had worked through the night at all. Near the final hours before sunrise, a servant stands alone beside a large window overlooking the courtyard. The sky is still dark, but a faint blue edge begins forming far on the horizon. Another night is ending, another cycle completed, and soon the castle will wake again, expecting perfection without remembering the hours that made it possible. The servant turns away from the window and walks back into the corridor where duties still wait quietly in the dim glow of fading lamps, because even now, the night is not fully over, and beyond the sleeping castle walls, one final chapter of labor remains, the moment when exhaustion finally meets dawn. Dawn arrives quietly over the medieval world, not with celebration, not with ceremony, but with a pale light slowly stretching across rooftops, fields, castles, mines, and villages that never truly stopped working through the night. The sky turns from deep black to soft gray blue, as if the world itself is breathing after a long exhaustion, and somewhere inside that quiet transition, the workers finally begin to stop, one by one. During medieval times, there was no single moment when labor ended for everyone. Instead, it faded gradually, like a tide pulling back from the shore. A chimney cleaner leans against a stone wall near an alley, soot still clinging to his skin, eyes heavy from hours spent inside smoke-filled passages. A stable worker sits on overturned buckets beside sleeping horses, unable to stand properly anymore. A grave digger wipes wet earth from his hands as distant bells mark the end of another burial cycle. A kitchen worker stares into dying embers while the last traces of heat fade from massive hearths. A miner emerges from underground, blinking at sunlight as if it is something unfamiliar, all across the medieval world. Exhaustion finally reaches its quiet peak, not dramatic, not sudden, just the body giving in after refusing to stop for too long. Inside small wooden homes, workers collapse onto simple bedding made of straw, wool, or rough cloth. Some still wear their work clothes. Mud dries on boots left near doorways. Hands remain slightly trembling from hours of effort. Outside, life continues faintly. Roosters call again. Smoke rises from early fires. A new day begins for others, but for those returning from night labor, dawn feels less like a beginning and more like release. A medieval farmer sits against his wall for a moment before lying down fully, too tired to even remove his cloak. A stable worker closes his eyes beside the faint sounds of animals settling. A servant who worked through the night finally rests near a dim candle that burns itself out quietly. Sleep during medieval times was not always peaceful, but it was necessary, because tomorrow would demand everything again. As sunlight slowly fills the village paths, the world begins to reorganize itself into another cycle of labor. Doors open. Bells ring. Tools are picked up again. Fires are relit. Animals are fed, and the same people who collapsed into sleep moments ago will soon rise again into motion. That was life in medieval times, not defined by single events, but by repetition, endless work woven into every hour, every season, every year. And yet, within that exhaustion, there were still small moments of calm. A warm fire after winter work, a quiet field before sunrise, a brief silence inside a stable at night, a shared glance between tired workers who understood each other without speaking. And perhaps that is what remains most human about these forgotten lives, not the suffering alone, but the quiet endurance beneath it, as the camera of memory slowly pulls away from the medieval world. Past villages, castles, mines, kitchens, and fields, the sounds begin to fade. Hammering, footsteps, water boiling, wind through trees, and finally, silence, a long, peaceful silence over a world that never truly stopped moving. Good night.